The fluorescent lights in County General's emergency department hummed their usual monotonous tune, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, that dead zone between the lunch rush and the evening chaos, when the real emergencies hadn't yet rolled in, but the minor complaints had tapered off. The kind of shift where nurses caught their breath, restocked supplies, and pretended they weren't constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sarah Mitchell stood at the nurses' station, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, reviewing charts with the kind of focused intensity that made her seem older than her 28 years. She'd been at County General for exactly 6 weeks now, having transferred from a hospital system 3 states away, and she was still in that awkward phase where she knew the protocols but not the people, understood the medicine but not the politics. Her references had been impeccable, her credentials flawless. But there was something about her that the other nurses couldn't quite place. She was competent, certainly, maybe even exceptional, but she kept herself at a distance that felt deliberate, like a moat around a castle no one had been invited to enter. New girl's a little odd, don't you think? Carrie Reynolds had whispered to Jennifer Park during their break last week. Carrie was a 15-year veteran of the ER, the kind of nurse who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. She had that particular brand of confidence that came from being indispensable. The nurse who could start an IV on a dehydrated junkie in one stick while simultaneously calling out orders to the residents. Jennifer had shrugged, non-committal. She was newer herself, only 3 years in, and still remembered what it felt like to be the outsider. She seems nice enough. Quiet, but nice. Quiet, Carrie had repeated, drawing out the word like it was evidence of something sinister. That's one word for it. Personally, I'd say antisocial. You notice she never comes to happy hour? Never joins us for lunch? Just shows up, does her shift, and disappears like some kind of ghost? It was true that Sarah didn't socialize much. She arrived for her shifts exactly 15 minutes early, spent her breaks alone in the staff lounge with a book or her phone, and left as soon as her responsibilities were complete. She didn't participate in the gossip that fueled the nurses' station, didn't share stories about her weekend, didn't complain about difficult patients or incompetent doctors. In a workplace that thrived on camaraderie and shared misery, her self-sufficiency felt almost aggressive. But she was good at her job. Even Carrie couldn't deny that. Sarah's assessments were thorough, her documentation meticulous, her interventions swift and appropriate. She had a way with the difficult patients, the scared ones, that bordered on magical, where other nurses might grow frustrated with the elderly woman demanding to know why her daughter hadn't called, or the young man high on meth and swinging at shadows. Sarah remained unflappable, her voice steady and calm, somehow talking them down from whatever ledge they'd climbed onto. Dr. Marcus Webb had noticed it too. He was one of the ER attending physicians, a man in his early 50s with silver threading through his black hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from 20 years of emergency medicine. He'd seen countless nurses come and go, and he prided himself on being able to read people, to understand what made them tick. Sarah Mitchell intrigued him precisely because she was so hard to read. She's got that 1,000-yard stare sometimes. He'd mentioned to his colleague, Dr. Yolanda Chen, over coffee one morning, like she's seeing something the rest of us can't. Yolanda, who'd done her residency at a level 1 trauma center in Chicago and thought she'd seen everything, had nodded thoughtfully. Military, maybe? That kind of composure under pressure, the way she moves, always aware of her surroundings. I'd bet money she's got some kind of service background. But if Sarah had served, she never mentioned it. Her scrubs bore no pins, no patches, no indicators of prior affiliation. Her locker in the break room was as anonymous as a hotel room, containing only the bare essentials and nothing personal. No photos, no mementos, no little touches that might hint at a life beyond these walls. The truth was that Sarah Mitchell was running from something, though she would never have phrased it that way. She preferred to think of it as moving forward, as starting over, as choosing a different chapter. The fact that she'd left behind everything and everyone she'd ever known wasn't running, she told herself. It was surviving. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the ER was handling its usual assortment of minor emergencies. An elderly man with chest pain that would turn out to be heartburn, a construction worker with a nail through his hand who was remarkably stoic about the whole thing, a teenager who'd tried to cut her own hair and had somehow managed to get the scissors stuck. The rhythm of the ER was predictable in its unpredictability, and Sarah moved through it with practiced efficiency, her mind half on her patients and half on the continuing education module she needed to complete before her shift ended. She was restocking the supply closet in exam room 3 when she heard the commotion at the ambulance bay. The distinctive wail of sirens, the urgent squawk of the radio, the sudden shift in energy that meant something serious was coming in. She emerged from the exam room to see the automatic doors sliding open and the paramedics rushing through with a gurney. 22-year-old male, MVA, significant blood loss from a laceration to the femoral artery, the lead paramedic was shouting, rattling off vitals and interventions as they flew down the hallway. We've got pressure on it, but he's lost a lot already. BP dropping, heart rate 140. Sarah fell into step automatically, her training overriding everything else. She could see the patient now. A young man, barely more than a boy really, his face paper white except where it was smeared with blood. His clothes were soaked crimson, and the paramedic at his side had both hands pressed hard against his inner thigh, trying to stem the flow that was still seeping between his fingers. They wheeled him into Trauma 1, the largest of the exam rooms, equipped for exactly this kind of emergency. Dr. Webb was already there, gloved and gowned, barking orders. I need 2 large bore IVs. Get me 4 units of O negative, and somebody call surgery now. Sarah, I need you on that line. She moved into position, her hands steady as she prepared to establish IV access. The young man was semi-conscious, moaning, his eyes rolling back. The metallic smell of blood was overwhelming, that distinctive copper tang mixed with fear sweat and gasoline. It coated the back of Sarah's throat, filled her nostrils, seemed to seep into her skin. And then something happened. The smell hit her differently, not just the blood, but something else beneath it. Gunpowder maybe, or diesel fuel, or sand baking under an unforgiving sun. The fluorescent lights flickered. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe it was just her vision that suddenly seemed wrong, too bright and too dark all at once. The sounds of the trauma bay, Dr. Webb's voice, the monitors beeping, the other nurses moving around her, began to fade, replaced by something else. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades, shouting in a language she'd spent months learning and would spend years trying to forget. The crack of gunfire that never sounded like it did in the movies, sharper and flatter and somehow more real. Sarah's hands, which had been reaching for the IV catheter, suddenly stopped moving. She stood there, frozen, staring at the blood pooling on the floor beneath the gurney. So much blood, too much blood. The kind of blood that meant someone was dying, had died, would die no matter what you did. Sarah, Dr. Webb's voice cut through whatever fog had descended. I need that line now. But she couldn't move. Her body had simply stopped responding to her brain's commands, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the connection between thought and action. She stood there, still as a statue, her eyes locked on that spreading pool of red, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that didn't seem to be delivering any oxygen. Sarah! More urgent now, tinged with confusion and the first notes of anger. In an emergency room, hesitation could kill. There was no room for freezing, for fear, for anything except action. Carrie Reynolds didn't hesitate. She shouldered past Sarah, grabbing the IV supplies and moving into position. I've got it! She snapped. And there was something in her voice beyond just the urgency of the moment. Satisfaction maybe, or vindication. The new girl wasn't so perfect after all. Jennifer appeared at Sarah's side, taking her arm, gently but firmly pulling her away from the gurney and out of the way. Come on, she murmured, low enough that the others couldn't hear. Let's get you some air. Sarah let herself be led out of the trauma bay, her legs moving mechanically, her mind still somewhere else entirely. She was vaguely aware of Jennifer guiding her to the break room, sitting her down in one of the plastic chairs, but it all felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. The trembling started then, her hands shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists, her whole body suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. Breathe, Jennifer was saying, crouched in front of her, her face concerned but not unkind. Just breathe, Sarah, in and out. You're okay. But she wasn't okay. Sarah knew that with absolute certainty. She'd been not okay for 3 years now. ever since that day in the desert when everything had changed, when the person she'd been had died, and this new, damaged version had crawled out of the wreckage. She'd thought she was better. She'd done the therapy, taken the medication, forced herself back into nursing because it was all she knew how to do. She'd thought that working in a civilian hospital would be different, that the controlled chaos of an American emergency room would be nothing like a field hospital in a war zone. She'd been wrong. Behind her, through the half-open door of the break room, she could hear the voices from the trauma bay. Dr. Webb calling out orders, the beeping of monitors, the organized chaos of a team trying to save a life. And under it all, Carrie's voice, loud enough to carry, "Can you believe she just froze like that? What kind of nurse freezes at the sight of blood?" There was laughter, nervous and unkind. The kind of laughter that happens when people are scared and looking for something to release the tension. Someone to blame. Sarah was an easy target. The antisocial new girl who thought she was so competent, brought down by something as basic as a trauma patient. It would be all over the hospital by the end of the shift. "Ignore them," Jennifer said softly. But Sarah could hear the doubt in her voice too. How could you trust a nurse who froze in an emergency? How could you count on someone who couldn't handle the very thing they were supposed to be trained for? Sarah wanted to explain. Wanted to tell them that it wasn't the blood that had triggered her, not really. It was everything else. The smell, the sounds, the way the young man's face had looked so terrified and so resigned all at once. It was the way it had all combined to punch through the careful walls she'd built in her mind, to drag her back to a place she'd spent 3 years trying to leave behind. But the words wouldn't come. They never did, not when it mattered. After a few minutes, Jennifer had to return to her patients. She squeezed Sarah's shoulder before she left, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but somehow made Sarah feel even more isolated. She sat alone in the break room, her hands still trembling, her mind replaying the incident over and over. She'd failed, after weeks of proving herself, of being competent and reliable and everything a good nurse should be. She'd frozen when it mattered most. The shift dragged on. Sarah forced herself to return to the floor after 20 minutes, knowing that hiding would only make things worse. She threw herself into the mundane tasks, checking vitals, changing dressings, updating charts. The other nurses gave her a wide berth, some looking curious, others openly judgmental. Carrie made a point of asking someone else to assist her with a procedure, her meaning crystal clear. The young man from the trauma bay survived. Sarah heard the update from one of the residents. He'd made it to surgery. The vascular team had repaired the artery. His prognosis was good. She should have felt relieved, but all she felt was numb. She'd been useless when he'd needed her. Worse than useless, she'd been a liability. As the shift neared its end, Sarah was called to Dr. Webb's office. She'd been expecting it, dreading it, but she went without argument. Whatever was coming, she deserved it. Dr. Webb's office was small and cluttered, filled with medical texts and patient files, and the accumulated detritus of 2 decades in emergency medicine. He was sitting behind his desk when she arrived, and he gestured for her to take the seat across from him. His expression was serious but not unkind, the face of a man who'd seen too much to rush to judgment but who also couldn't ignore what he'd witnessed. "Sarah," he began, then paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "What happened today in Trauma 1? That's not something I can just overlook. When we have a critical patient, every second counts. Every member of the team needs to be able to function under pressure." "I know," Sarah said quietly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat and distant. "I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," he said. But there was no anger in his tone, just a kind of weary concern. "I need to understand what happened. You've been excellent in every other situation. Your skills are solid, your judgment sound, but today you completely shut down. If I'm going to have you in my ER, I need to know that won't happen again." Sarah met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. Dr. Webb's gaze was steady, professional, but there was something else there too. Curiosity, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding. She made a decision in that moment. One she'd been avoiding for 6 weeks, for 3 years. For longer than that, if she was honest. "I was a combat nurse," she said, the words coming out rushed. Like if she didn't say them quickly, she'd lose her nerve entirely. "In Afghanistan. I did 2 tours, worked in a forward surgical hospital. What happened today, the blood, the emergency, it brought things back. Things I've been trying to forget. Dr. Webb leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from concern to something more complex. Recognition, maybe. PTSD? Yes, Sarah confirmed, grateful he'd said it so she didn't have to. I've been in therapy. I'm on medication. I thought I had it under control. I've been working in ER since I got back, and I've been fine. Today was just a trigger, Dr. Webb finished for her. He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then he did something unexpected. He stood up and came around the desk, pulling his own chair to sit beside her, rather than across from her. When he settled, he turned his head slightly, exposing his neck. "Do you see this?" he asked, pointing to a small, puckered scar just below his ear, barely visible beneath his collar. Sarah looked, confused about where this was going. The scar was old, faded to a silvery white, the kind of mark that most people probably never noticed. "Shrapnel," Dr. Webb said. "Desert Storm. I was a medic attached to a Marine unit. We got hit by indirect fire one night, and a piece of metal about the size of my thumbnail lodged itself right here. 1/4 inch to the left and it would have hit my carotid. I would have bled out in the sand before anyone could have helped me." Sarah stared at him, seeing him differently now. Not just her boss, not just an ER doctor, but someone who understood. Someone who'd been there. "I got out, went to medical school, specialized in emergency medicine," Dr. Webb continued. "Thought I was fine. Thought I'd processed everything, moved on, all that therapeutic bullshit they tell you. Then one day, about 5 years into my practice, we had a mass casualty incident. Bus accident. Multiple traumas, blood everywhere, chaos. And I froze. Just like you did today. Stood there in the middle of the trauma bay like an idiot while people died around me." "What did you do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eventually, got back into therapy, specialized trauma therapy this time, with someone who actually understood combat exposure. Learned my triggers, learned coping mechanisms, learned that sometimes the brain just short circuits, and there's no amount of willpower that can override it." He paused, then added, "But that first time, I thought my career was over. Thought I was irredeemably broken, aren't we?" Sarah asked, and there was something raw in her voice, a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "No," Dr. Webb said firmly. "We're wounded. That's different from broken. Broken means it can't be fixed. Wounded means it needs time and care and the right treatment. You're wounded, Sarah. What happened today doesn't change the fact that you're a damn good nurse." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of shame and fear that had been there since she'd walked out of the trauma bay. "The others don't think so. They think I'm weak." "Let me worry about the others," Dr. Webb said. "But Sarah, I need you to be honest with me. Can you continue working here? Not should you, not do you want to, but can you? Because if you can't, if this is too much too soon, there's no shame in that either." Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. The easy answer would be to quit, to run again, to find some quieter corner of medicine where the stakes weren't so high and the triggers weren't so present. But she'd been running for 3 years, and it hadn't gotten her anywhere except more isolated, more alone. "I can," she said finally. "I want to. I need people to know why it happened. I need them to understand I'm not just some weak nurse who can't handle the job." Dr. Webb nodded slowly. "That's your choice to make, whether you disclose your background. But Sarah, you don't owe them your trauma. You don't have to justify your wounds to anyone." "I know," Sarah said. "But I think I need to, for myself if nothing else." They talked for a while longer, working out a plan. Dr. Webb would speak to HR, make sure her PTSD was properly documented as a medical condition, ensure she had protections under the ADA if needed. He'd also have a quiet word with the nurse manager about the importance of not tolerating discrimination. Sarah would continue her therapy, maybe increase the frequency for a while. They'd work together to identify her specific triggers and develop strategies for managing them. When Sarah finally left Dr. Webb's office, it was late, well past the end of her shift. The ER had shifted into evening mode, a different crew taking over for the night shift. But she didn't go straight to her locker. Instead, she went back to the nurse's station, where Carrie was finishing up her charting, clearly annoyed to be running late. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. Carrie looked up, surprised and wary. "I'm kind of busy." "It'll be quick," Sarah said. "Please." Something in her tone made Carrie pause. She saved her chart and turned to face Sarah fully, crossing her arms defensively. "Okay, talk." Sarah took a breath. This was harder than she'd expected. Standing here in the bright lights of the nurses' station, about to expose herself to someone who'd already judged her and found her wanting. But Dr. Webb was right. She was wounded, not broken. And wounds could heal. "I froze today because I have PTSD," Sarah said clearly, loudly enough that anyone nearby would hear. She saw Jennifer look up from across the station, saw a couple of the other nurses pause in their work. "I was a combat nurse in Afghanistan. I spent 18 months in a forward surgical hospital treating casualties from IEDs and firefights and suicide bombers. I saw things that no one should have to see, and I did things that still keep me up at night." Carrie's expression had shifted from defensive to shocked. She opened her mouth, closed it again, clearly not knowing what to say. "What happened today? That wasn't weakness," Sarah continued. "That was my brain recognizing a threat that wasn't really there anymore. It was a trauma response, a survival mechanism that got wired into me when I was in a place where hesitation meant death. I've been working on it, I'm in therapy, I'm managing it, but sometimes it still happens." She stopped, giving Carrie a chance to respond. The other nurse looked uncomfortable, ashamed maybe, but also something else. Curious. "I didn't know," Carrie said finally. "You never said anything." "I know," Sarah acknowledged. "That's on me. I thought if I just kept my head down and did my job, my past wouldn't matter. But it does matter, because it's part of who I am. And I need the people I work with to know that if I struggle sometimes, it's not because I'm incompetent. It's because I'm still learning how to live in a world where the biggest threat is a difficult patient, not a mortar round." There was a long moment of silence. Then Jennifer spoke up from across the station. "Thank you for telling us," she said softly. "That took courage." Carrie nodded slowly, her arms uncrossing. "Yeah," she said, and she actually sounded sincere. "It did, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry I laughed. That was shitty of me." "Apology accepted," Sarah said, because what else could she say? The damage was done, but maybe it could be repaired. Maybe they could move forward. She left then, before the emotion she'd been holding back could overwhelm her. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, noting with a kind of detached interest that her hands were still shaking slightly. In the mirror above the sink, she caught sight of her own reflection and paused. She looked tired. She always looked tired these days, with dark circles under her eyes that concealer could never quite cover, and lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before Afghanistan. But there was something else in her face now, too. Something she hadn't seen in a while. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. Her hand went automatically to her neck, to the scar she'd stopped thinking about most days. It was small, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A puckered white line just below her jawline on the right side. She traced it with her fingertips, remembering the moment it had been made. The memory came differently than her flashbacks did. Those were chaotic, overwhelming, all-consuming. This was just a memory, painful but bearable. She'd been triaging casualties after a roadside bomb had hit a convoy, working in the blazing heat with sweat stinging her eyes and blood on her hands. The wounded had kept coming. So many wounded, more than their small hospital could handle. She'd been moving from one patient to another when the sniper round had hit. She hadn't heard it coming. That's what everyone always got wrong about gunfire in the movies. You didn't hear the shot that hit you, not if the shooter was any good. 1 second she'd been checking a soldier's airway. The next she was on the ground with her hand pressed to her neck and blood seeping between her fingers. The bullet had grazed her carotid artery, missing it by millimeters. Another inch to the left and she would have bled out in seconds. They'd stabilized her, evacuated her to a larger facility, patched her up. The physical wound had healed in weeks. The rest was still healing 3 years later. Sarah pulled her hand away from her neck, away from the scar. She finished changing, gathered her things, and headed out into the parking lot. The Arizona evening was warm, the sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as it set behind the mountains. She stood by her car for a moment, just breathing in the clean air, letting the normalcy of it anchor her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her therapist, Dr. Amanda Morrison, who she'd messaged earlier about what had happened. Remember, healing isn't linear. Setback doesn't mean failure. Call me if you need to talk. Sarah smiled slightly and sent back a thumbs up. Then she got in her car and drove home to her small apartment, where she would make dinner and watch something mindless on TV and try to sleep without dreaming of sand and blood and the faces of the soldiers she hadn't been able to save. The next day was her day off, which felt like a gift. She spent it doing laundry and grocery shopping and going for a long run through the desert trails near her apartment. The physical exertion helped, always had. When her body was tired enough, her mind couldn't spiral quite as effectively. She didn't let herself think about the ER, about what would happen when she went back for her next shift. She just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing in and out, on staying present in her body. When she returned to work 2 days later, she wasn't sure what to expect. Part of her feared that nothing would have changed, that the other nurses would still see her as weak, unreliable. Part of her feared that everything would change, that they'd treat her like something fragile and broken, speaking in hushed voices and giving her only the easy patients. What actually happened was somewhere in between. Carrie greeted her with a nod when she arrived, not quite friendly but no longer hostile. Jennifer gave her a warm smile and asked how her days off had been. Dr. Webb caught her eye and gave her a subtle thumbs up. The day shift went on as normal, the usual chaos of an emergency department on a Thursday morning. It was around 10 a.m. when the call came in about the mass casualty incident. A pileup on the interstate, multiple vehicles, unknown number of casualties. The ER went into disaster mode, everyone moving with practiced efficiency to prepare for the incoming flood of patients. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, felt that familiar tightening in her chest. This was it, the test. Could she do this? Could she face another trauma situation without freezing? The first ambulance arrived, then the second, then 3 more in quick succession. The ER filled with the sounds of pain and fear and urgency. Sarah was assigned to Trauma 2, assisting Dr. Chen with a middle-aged woman who'd been T-boned by a semi-truck. The woman was conscious but in shock, with a possible rib fracture and internal bleeding. Sarah's hands moved automatically, starting IVs, hanging fluids, cutting away clothing to assess for injuries. Her training took over, muscle memory guiding her through the procedures she'd done thousands of times. But she stayed present too, aware of her breathing, of the tension in her shoulders, of the way her mind was trying to pull her back to other traumas in other places. She used the techniques Dr. Morrison had taught her. Grounding exercises, focusing on sensory details in the present moment, the smell of antiseptic, distinct from desert heat, the beeping of monitors, different from radio chatter, the fluorescent lights, steady and constant, not flickering like the generators in a combat hospital. It worked. She stayed present. She functioned. "Sarah, I need you to hold pressure here while I get the ultrasound," Dr. Chen was saying, and Sarah did. Her hands steady, her mind clear. They worked together seamlessly, stabilizing the patient, ruling out life-threatening injuries, getting her ready for CT scan. When the worst of the rush was over, when the trauma bays had cleared and the patients had either been admitted or discharged, Sarah found herself standing at the sink, scrubbing blood off her hands. Carrie appeared beside her, washing her own hands, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence. "You did good today," Carrie said finally, not looking at Sarah but at her own reflection in the mirror. "Really good." "Thanks," Sarah replied, surprised by how much the acknowledgement meant. "Listen," Carrie continued, turning off the water and reaching for paper towels. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Afghanistan and everything, and I realized I don't know anything about what that was like. None of us do, not really. We see the news, we hear the stories, but we don't actually understand what you went through." Sarah waited, not sure where this was going. "So I was wondering," Carrie said, meeting Sarah's eyes now, "would you be willing to do an in-service? Talk to the staff about combat medicine, about PTSD, about what it's like to transition from military to civilian nursing? I think it would be really valuable. Help us understand each other better. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of standing up in front of her colleagues and talking about her experiences made her stomach clench with anxiety. But then she thought about Dr. Webb, about the scar on his neck, and his willingness to share his story. She thought about how isolated she'd felt trying to hide her past, and how relieved she'd felt after finally being honest. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Yeah, I could do that." Carrie smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. "Great. I'll talk to the nurse manager, set something up." Over the next few weeks, Sarah felt something shift at County General. It wasn't dramatic, no single moment of transformation, but rather a gradual thawing of the icy distance she'd maintained. People started inviting her to lunch, actually waiting for her response rather than assuming she'd say no. They asked her about her life, and she found herself answering carefully at first, then with increasing comfort. She learned that Carrie had a son in the army, stationed in Germany, and that her brusque manner was partly a defense mechanism against constant worry. She learned that Jennifer had lost her brother in Iraq, and that seeing Sarah frozen in the trauma bay had triggered her own painful memories. She learned that Dr. Chen had done a medical mission in Rwanda after the genocide, and that she understood trauma in ways that went beyond textbook definitions. Everyone, it turned out, was carrying something. Sarah's wounds might have been from combat, but pain was pain, loss was loss, and the human capacity for both destruction and healing was universal. The in-service was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon during the usual staff education time. Sarah spent days preparing, working with Dr. Morrison on what to share and what to keep private, how to be honest without being overwhelming. She created a PowerPoint presentation, gathered statistics about veteran mental health, prepared talking points about the differences between combat and civilian medicine. When the day arrived, she stood in front of about 30 staff members, nurses, doctors, techs, even a few administrators who'd heard about the presentation and wanted to attend. Her hands were shaking as she pulled up her first slide, but her voice was steady as she began to speak. "I want to start by showing you something," she said. And instead of the title slide, she pulled up a photo. It showed a young woman in desert camouflage, dusty and exhausted, standing in front of a medical tent with other service members. The woman was smiling, but her eyes looked 1,000 years old. "That's me," Sarah said. 3 years ago, at Forward Surgical Hospital Sharana in Afghanistan. I was 25 years old. I'd been in country for 14 months, and I'd already seen more death and destruction than most people see in a lifetime. She clicked to the next slide. This one showing statistics about combat medical care, about the improved survival rates from battlefield injuries, about the volume of casualties processed through forward hospitals. The numbers were staggering. As combat nurses, we dealt with things that don't really happen in civilian medicine, Sarah continued. Traumatic amputations from IEDs, burns from vehicle fires, penetrating trauma from bullets and shrapnel, mass casualty events where we had to make decisions about who to treat first, knowing that some people wouldn't survive long enough for us to get to them. She talked about the unique stressors of combat medicine, working under fire, treating friends and colleagues, the moral injury of having to prioritize some lives over others. She talked about the hypervigilance that had been essential for survival there, but had become debilitating here. She talked about triggers and flashbacks and the way trauma rewires the brain. And then she talked about her own experience. Not all of it, not the worst of it, but enough to help them understand. "I was shot while treating casualties," she said simply, turning her head to expose the scar on her neck. In the fluorescent lights of the conference room, it was more visible than usual. A pale line against her skin. Sniper round, probably Taliban. It missed my carotid by about 3 millimeters. The soldier next to me, the one I'd been treating, wasn't so lucky. The next round hit him in the head and he died while I was trying to stop my own bleeding. The room was completely silent. Sarah could see the shock on their faces, the dawning understanding. This wasn't an abstract war story. This was real trauma, carried in the body and mind of someone they worked with every day. "When I froze in the trauma bay a few weeks ago," Sarah continued, "it wasn't because I couldn't handle the sight of blood. I've seen more blood than anyone should have to see. It was because in that moment, My brain couldn't tell the difference between that trauma bay and a field hospital under attack. The smells, the sounds, the urgency. It all combined to convince my nervous system that I was back in that place where freezing meant death. She clicked to a slide about PTSD, about how it's not weakness, but rather a natural response to unnatural events. She talked about treatment, about therapy and medication, and coping strategies. She talked about the importance of understanding and accommodation, about how trauma-informed workplaces could support staff who'd experienced significant stress. "I'm telling you all this not because I want your pity," Sarah said, meeting the eyes of various colleagues around the room. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand that healing isn't linear, and triggers can come from unexpected places, and someone who seems fine one day might struggle the next. That's not failure. That's just what living with trauma looks like." When she finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause. It felt strange to be applauded for sharing her pain, but she understood what the applause really meant: recognition, appreciation, respect. The questions that followed were thoughtful and genuine. Dr. Webb asked about the differences in emergency protocols between combat and civilian settings. Jennifer asked about resources for families of veterans. Carrie asked how they could better support staff members who might be dealing with PTSD or other trauma-related conditions. Sarah answered as best she could, drawing on her own experience and the knowledge she'd gained through years of therapy and research. When someone asked if she regretted her service, she paused, really thinking about the question. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. What happened over there changed me, damaged me in ways I'm still working to heal. But it also gave me skills and perspective that make me a better nurse. I can stay calm in chaos because I've seen real chaos. I can connect with patients who are terrified because I know what terror feels like. I understand that sometimes the body keeps score even when the mind wants to move on." After the presentation, people approached her individually. Some shared their own stories. A nurse whose husband had come back from Iraq with severe PTSD. A respiratory therapist who'd been in a serious car accident and still struggled with anxiety while driving. A doctor who'd survived an abusive childhood and recognized the same hypervigilance in Sarah that he saw in himself. The walls she'd built around herself, thinking they were protecting her, had actually been isolating her from people who understood, who'd walked their own versions of her journey. Dr. Webb caught her as she was packing up her laptop. "That was brave," he said quietly. "Really brave. You gave them something important today. Permission to be human, to be wounded and still worthy." "You did the same for me," Sarah replied, touching her neck unconsciously. "When you showed me your scar, when you told me your story, it changed something. Made me realize I didn't have to carry this alone. We're never as alone as we think we are," Dr. Webb said. "That's the thing about trauma. It makes you feel isolated, like you're the only one who can't cope, the only one who's broken. But once you start being honest about it, you realize there's a whole community of wounded healers out there, people who've been through fire and somehow come out the other side still capable of helping others." The weeks that followed saw a shift in the culture of the ER. It wasn't that trauma disappeared or that triggers stopped existing, but rather that there was more awareness, more compassion. When a pediatric code came in and one of the younger nurses had to step out, overcome with emotion, no one laughed or judged. When a doctor froze during a particularly gruesome trauma involving a construction accident, Sarah was the one who stepped up, who took over calmly and efficiently, who later checked on him to make sure he was okay. Sarah continued her therapy with Dr. Morrison, working through layers of trauma she'd been avoiding for years. She joined a support group for veterans, sitting in a circle in a community center basement every Tuesday evening with other people who understood what it meant to come home from war and feel like you'd left pieces of yourself behind. She started running with another veteran from the group, a former Army Ranger named Marcus, who'd lost his leg to an IED and now ran marathons on a prosthetic just to prove he could. "The thing nobody tells you," Marcus said one morning as they jogged through the desert trails, the sun just starting to rise over the mountains, "is that coming home is harder than being over there in a lot of ways. Over there, at least everyone understood what you were going through. Here, people just want you to be normal again. Like you can just flip a switch and turn off everything you saw and did." "Yeah," Sarah agreed. breathing hard as they climbed a particularly steep section of trail. And when you can't just be normal, when you freeze or freak out or can't handle something that should be simple, you feel like you're failing. Like you're weak, but we're not weak, Marcus said firmly. We survived. We're still here. That takes more strength than most people will ever understand. Sarah thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. Strength, she was learning, wasn't about never struggling or never showing vulnerability. Real strength was in continuing to show up, day after day, even when it was hard. Real strength was in asking for help when you needed it, in being honest about your limitations, in working steadily toward healing, even when progress felt impossibly slow. The young man from the trauma bay, the one whose case had triggered her so badly, came back to the ER for a follow-up visit 6 weeks after his accident. Sarah happened to be working that day, and when she saw his name on the board, she felt her stomach clench with anxiety. But she forced herself to go into his room, to face the reminder of her failure. He was sitting on the exam table, looking remarkably healthy for someone who'd nearly bled out on that same table just weeks before. His color was good, his wound healing well, his spirits high. He didn't remember much about the actual trauma, which was probably a blessing, but he remembered the voices of the medical team working on him, remembered feeling like he was going to be okay because of the confidence in those voices. I just wanted to come back and thank everyone, he said, his young face earnest. The paramedics told me I shouldn't have survived. The amount of blood I lost, the damage to the artery. They said I was lucky you all knew what you were doing. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd been so focused on her own failure that she'd forgotten the outcome. He'd lived. The team had saved him, even without her help in those critical first moments. She'd failed that day, yes, but the system had compensated, and the patient had survived. It wasn't about her being perfect. It was about the team being effective. I'm glad you made it, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Really glad. 3 months after her presentation, County General's administration approached Sarah about developing a formal trauma-informed care program for the hospital. They wanted to train all staff on recognizing signs of PTSD and other trauma responses, both in patients and colleagues. They wanted to create support systems for staff who experience secondary trauma from their work. They wanted Sarah to help lead the initiative. She said yes, even though the responsibility felt enormous, even though she still had days where she struggled with her own symptoms. Because maybe that was the point. Maybe the best person to teach about trauma wasn't someone who'd conquered it completely, but someone still in the process of healing. Someone who understood both the struggle and the possibility of growth. Working on the program meant digging deeper into trauma research, consulting with experts, sharing her story over and over with different groups throughout the hospital. It was exhausting and triggering and also strangely healing. Each time she talked about her experiences, they became a little less raw, a little more integrated into the narrative of who she was, rather than something shameful she had to hide. She developed training modules on recognizing trauma responses, on de-escalation techniques for patients experiencing flashbacks or dissociation, on creating psychological safety in high-stress environments. She brought in speakers from veteran organizations, from domestic violence shelters, from refugee services. She helped create protocols for staff who needed mental health breaks during their shifts, who needed accommodations for trauma-related disabilities, who needed support from their colleagues. The program launched hospital-wide 6 months after Sarah had frozen in that trauma bay. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her worst moment had somehow become the catalyst for positive change, not just for herself, but for the entire institution. The nurse who'd been laughed at for freezing was now teaching others how to respond to trauma with compassion and understanding. One afternoon, Sarah was sitting in the break room reviewing materials for an upcoming training session when Carrie came in and flopped down in the chair across from her. They'd become something like friends over the past months, their relationship evolving from hostile to professional to genuinely warm. "Can I tell you something?" Carrie asked, her usual brash confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "Of course," Sarah said, closing her laptop to give Carrie her full attention. "My son called last night," Carrie said, "from Germany, and he told me he's been struggling, that being in the army isn't what he thought it would be, that he's been having panic attacks and nightmares even though he's never been in combat. He's just stationed on a base, doing regular work, but the stress of it, the military culture, it's been getting to him, Sarah nodded. Listening, the old me, before your presentation, before understanding any of this, I would have told him to tough it out, to be strong, to remember that he chose this. Carrie continued, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But instead I told him that asking for help takes more courage than suffering in silence. I told him about you, about PTSD, about how trauma isn't weakness, and he's going to talk to someone on base, get evaluated, maybe get treatment. That's good, Sarah said softly. That's really good, Carrie. It's because of you, Carrie said fiercely. If you hadn't been brave enough to tell your story, if you hadn't been vulnerable enough to let us see your struggle, I never would have understood what my son was going through. You might have saved his life, Sarah. You might have saved my relationship with my son. Sarah felt the tears she'd been holding back start to fall. She'd spent so long seeing her trauma as something shameful, as damage that diminished her, that she'd never considered it might also be something valuable, something that could help others. Thank you for telling me that, she managed to say. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Two women who'd started as adversaries and become allies, both learning that strength came in forms they'd never expected. A year after Sarah had started at County General, Dr. Webb called her into his office again. She went without the dread she'd felt the first time, curious rather than anxious about what he wanted. Sit down, he said, gesturing to the chair. I have something to show you. He pulled up an email on his computer and turned the screen so she could see it. It was from the hospital's chief medical officer, and the subject line read, Trauma-Informed Care Recognition. Sarah scanned the email quickly. It was announcing that County General had been recognized by a national healthcare organization for excellence in trauma-informed care practices. The email specifically mentioned Sarah's program, praising its comprehensive approach and measurable positive outcomes. Staff satisfaction scores were up. Patient satisfaction scores were up. Reports of workplace conflict were down. They want you to present at their national conference, Dr. Webb said, unable to contain his smile. Your program is being held up as a model for other hospitals to follow. Sarah stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, trying to make them feel real. A year ago, she'd been the new nurse that everyone doubted, the one who froze when it mattered, the one who was whispered about and judged. And now she was being asked to present at a national conference, her work recognized as innovative and valuable. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, Dr. Webb advised. Say yes, and then keep doing what you're doing. Keep being honest about your struggles. Keep showing people that wounded healers can be the most effective healers of all, precisely because they understand what it means to hurt. Sarah did say yes. She traveled to the conference in Chicago 6 months later, standing on a stage in front of hundreds of healthcare professionals, telling her story once again. But this time it felt different. This time she wasn't just exposing her wounds. She was showing how those wounds had transformed into wisdom, into compassion, into a deeper understanding of the human experience. She showed them the photo of herself in Afghanistan, young and traumatized and trying to hold it together. Then she showed them a current photo, one that Jennifer had taken at a recent staff barbecue. In it, Sarah was laughing at something Marcus had said, her arm around Carrie's shoulders, surrounded by colleagues who'd become friends. She still looked tired. Trauma left its marks. But she also looked alive in a way she hadn't in that earlier photo. She looked like someone who'd found her way home. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened, Sarah told the audience. It's not about pretending the trauma never occurred, or that it didn't change you. Healing is about integration, about making your experiences part of your story without letting them be the only story. It's about acknowledging your wounds, while also recognizing your strength. She talked about the importance of creating psychologically safe workplaces, where people could be honest about their struggles without fear of judgment or consequences. She talked about the ripple effects of trauma, how one person's healing could inspire another's, how vulnerability could create connection, how shared pain could become shared resilience. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But what moved her most was what came after, when dozens of people approached her to share their own stories. Nurses who'd experienced assault, doctors who struggled with addiction, administrators dealing with the aftermath of personal tragedy. Each one had been carrying their pain alone, thinking they were the only one, until Sarah's story gave them permission to be honest. A young nurse, probably fresh out of school, approached her with tears streaming down her face. "I was in a school shooting when I was 15, she said. "I watched my best friend die in front of me, and ever since I started working in the ER, I've been terrified that I'll freeze when someone really needs me, that my trauma will make me useless." Sarah took the young woman's hands in hers. "Your trauma doesn't make you useless," she said firmly. "It makes you human, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer our patients is our humanity, our understanding that suffering is real and pain matters, and survival is an achievement." "But what if I can't do it?" the nurse asked. "What if I freeze like you did?" "Then you freeze," Sarah said simply, "and then you get back up, and you get help, and you try again. That's all any of us can do. The measure of a good nurse isn't never struggling. It's struggling, and still choosing to show up, still choosing to care, still choosing to heal others even while you're healing yourself." Flying home from Chicago, Sarah looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about all the ways her life had changed. She thought about the nurse she'd been before Afghanistan, confident, competent, believing herself invincible. She thought about the nurse who'd come home from war, broken, terrified, convinced she'd never be whole again. And she thought about the nurse she was now, wounded but healing, struggling but strong, carrying her scars openly instead of hiding them in shame. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How'd the presentation go, war hero?" She smiled and typed back, "Stop calling me that." "But it went well." "Really well. Proud of you," he responded. "Tuesday run still on?" "Wouldn't miss it." She put her phone away and closed her eyes, letting herself drift in that space between sleep and waking. In that liminal state, memories came as they always did, but they felt different now. Less like attacks and more like reminders, less like enemies and more like teachers. The faces of the soldiers she'd treated, both those who'd survived and those who hadn't. The sound of helicopter blades and distant explosions. The smell of desert sand and antiseptic. The weight of responsibility and the burden of impossible choices. But also, the feel of a patient's hand squeezing hers in gratitude. The sound of colleagues laughing in the break room, including her in their circle. The smell of coffee and desert rain. The weight of purpose and the gift of second chances. When Sarah returned to County General the following week, she found an envelope on her locker. Inside was a card signed by nearly every member of the ER staff. "Thank you for teaching us that scars are proof of survival," it read. "Thank you for showing us that the bravest thing we can do is be honest about our wounds." She tucked the card into her locker, next to the photo of her unit in Afghanistan that she'd finally felt brave enough to display. Then she changed into her scrubs and headed out to the nurses' station, ready for whatever the shift would bring. Carrie was already there, reviewing the overnight admits. She looked up when Sarah approached and grinned. "Ready for the chaos?" "Always," Sarah said, and she meant it. The shift started slow but picked up quickly, as ER shifts inevitably did. Motor vehicle accidents and chest pain and diabetic emergencies, and all the urgent human needs that brought people through those automatic doors. Sarah moved through it with practiced efficiency, her confidence rebuilt, not despite her trauma, but through her willingness to acknowledge it and work with it. Around noon, the paramedics brought in a patient that made Sarah's heart skip. A veteran, probably in his early 20s, with visible signs of distress and a medic alert bracelet indicating PTSD. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wild with panic, clearly in the grip of a severe anxiety attack or flashback. Sarah took the lead immediately, her voice calm and steady. "Sir, can you hear me? My name is Sarah. I'm a nurse, and I'm a veteran too. You're safe here. You're in a hospital in Arizona, not overseas. You're safe." She used every technique she'd learned, every strategy Dr. Morrison had taught her, every insight from her own experience. Grounding exercises, orienting statements, a gentle touch on his arm that communicated safety without threatening. Slowly, gradually, the young man's breathing steadied. His eyes focused on her face, seeing her instead of whatever horrors his mind had conjured. "Afghanistan?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah," Sarah confirmed, showing him the scar on her neck. "2 tours. I know where you've been." Something in his face broke open, relief flooding his features. "Nobody else understands," he said. "They try, but they don't know." "I know," Sarah said softly. "But you're going to be okay. We're going to make sure you get the help you need, connect you with the right resources. You're not alone in this." She stayed with him while they ran tests, while they contacted the VA, while they arranged for transfer to a facility that specialized in veteran mental health. And when he was finally being wheeled out to the ambulance that would take him to the next level of care, he grabbed her hand. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for today. For understanding. For being proof that it gets better." After he left, Sarah stood at the nurse's station for a moment, processing. Dr. Webb appeared at her elbow. "That was something," he said quietly. "The way you handled him, the connection you made. That's why your work matters, Sarah. That's why your story matters." "He reminded me of myself," Sarah admitted. 3 years ago, I was him, lost and scared and convinced I'd never be okay again. But you are okay, Dr. Webb pointed out. Not perfect, not without struggles, but okay. And he will be too, partly because you showed him it's possible. The rest of the shift passed in the usual blur of activity. But when it ended, when Sarah was changing out of her scrubs and gathering her things, she found herself pausing to look at her reflection in the locker room mirror one more time. She looked at the scar on her neck, visible now that she'd pulled her hair up. She looked at the tired lines around her eyes, the evidence of too many shifts and not enough sleep. She looked at the face of a woman who'd been to war and come home changed. But she also saw strength, resilience, purpose. She saw someone who'd fallen apart and put herself back together, not perfectly but authentically. She saw someone who'd learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but rather the foundation of true connection. She saw someone who'd discovered that her worst moment could become a catalyst for her most meaningful work. The wound on her neck had healed years ago, leaving only the scar. But the wounds inside had taken longer, were still healing in some ways, might always be healing in the way that profound trauma leaves permanent marks. That was okay. Those marks were part of her story, proof that she'd survived something that could have destroyed her. Sarah gathered her things and headed out to the parking lot, where the Arizona sun was setting in its usual spectacular display of color. Tomorrow she'd be back, ready to do it all again. There would be more patients, more emergencies, more moments that triggered her trauma response, but there would also be more connections, more healing, more chances to turn her pain into purpose. She thought about that young veteran, probably arriving at the VA facility right about now, beginning his own journey toward healing. She thought about Carrie's son in Germany, working with mental health professionals to address his struggles. She thought about all the nurses and doctors and staff members at County General who'd learned to see trauma differently, to respond with compassion instead of judgment. One person's courage to be vulnerable, she'd learned, could give others permission to be vulnerable too. One person's willingness to share their scars could help others feel less alone with their own wounds. And maybe that was the real lesson from all of this. That healing was never a solitary journey. That connection was the antidote to traumas. Isolation, that the scars we carried could become bridges instead of barriers. Sarah got in her car and drove home through the desert twilight, the mountains' dark silhouettes against the orange sky. She thought about calling her parents, whom she'd reconnected with 6 months ago after 3 years of minimal contact. She thought about the date she had scheduled for Friday night with a firefighter she'd met at a community event, her first attempt at dating since before Afghanistan. She thought about the life she was slowly, carefully rebuilding. not trying to return to who she'd been before, but accepting who she'd become. When they'd laughed at her for freezing at the blood, they hadn't seen the bullet scar on her neck, hadn't understood the weight of what she carried. But Dr. Webb had seen. He'd understood. And in understanding, he'd given her the courage to stop hiding, to stand in her truth, to transform her trauma into something meaningful. That was the real surprise, Sarah thought, as she pulled into her apartment complex. Not that she'd struggled. Trauma survivors struggled. That was expected. The surprise was that her struggle had become her strength, that her wounds had become her wisdom, that her worst moment had led to some of her best work. The surprise was that broken things, when pieced back together with honesty and courage and support, could become even more beautiful than they'd been before. The cracks, the scars, the places where the breaks had been, those weren't flaws. They were proof of survival. They were maps of the journey. They were stories worth telling. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt judged for, struggling or misunderstood because of wounds that others can't see, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Sarah's story reminds us that healing isn't about perfection. It's about courage, honesty, and the willingness to keep showing up even when it's hard. Maybe you know someone who needs to hear that message today. If this story moved you or made you think differently about trauma and healing, hitting the like button helps share these important stories with others who might need them. And if you want to hear more stories about resilience, redemption, and the unexpected ways people find strength in their darkest moments, consider subscribing. We're all carrying something. Maybe by sharing our stories, we make the burden a little lighter for everyone.